It still ranks as the deadliest building fire in U.S. history. 602 people, mostly small children and their mothers, killed during a matinee at the Iroquois Theater. It was Christmas time 1903. Holiday crowds braved freezing temperatures to see the musical comedy Mr. Bluebeard, starring Eddie Foy, at the brand new fireproof Iroquois on Randolph Street in Chicago. The house was packed, standing room only. Counting cast and crew, there were over 2,300 people in the building. During a musical number, a spark from an arc light ignited a backdrop. 5 stories of densely packed muslin and gauze scenery in the fly space above erupted into flame. Backstage was bedlam. Foy ran on stage to prevent a panic. He calmly asked the audience to remain seated while the asbestos fire curtain was lowered, but halfway down the curtain got stuck. At the same moment, fleeing stagehands threw open a rear scenery door. A blast of Arctic air rushed into the building, up to the fire. The ceiling vents, which were supposed to be open, were sealed shut, so the wind pushed the fire down toward the front of the stage. A huge fireball shot over Foy's head straight into the house, killing scores of people seated in the first few rows. All hell broke loose. The fire melted the circuits. It was pitch black. No exits were marked. They were hidden behind thick black curtains, and most were locked. Those in the upper balcony were horrified to discover that during the show the ushers had locked them in to prevent their sneaking down to better seats. It was a perfect death trap. Firefighters put out the blaze in less than 20 minutes, but when they panned their flashlights around the dark theater, they were sickened by what they saw. At each locked exit was a pyramid of bodies, 10, 12 feet high. A number of the victims were from Winnetka. In their zeal to open the show in time for the holidays, producers had violated every fire code imaginable. William Hoyt lost his daughter, Emily Fox, and 3 grandchildren in the Iroquois Theater Fire. An active member of Christ Church on Sheridan Road, he offered to build a new church as a memorial to them. The original church was itself a memorial. John Garland built it to honor his wife Susanna after her death in 1867, and he chose the spot where Erastus Patterson had started a graveyard. Garland named it Christ Church, hoping it would be a house of worship for all denominations, though he was Unitarian. His next wife, however, was Episcopalian. She convinced him to let the Episcopalians have it. The original structure was donated to the Swedish Evangelical Church, who had been meeting in a storefront. The old structure was taken apart board by board, carted over to the northeast corner of Elm and Birch, reassembled and covered with plaster. This was the predecessor to the Winnetka Bible Church. William Hoyt's new sanctuary for Christ Church was completed in 1906. A small plaque honoring the victims can be found near the front door. As for those responsible for the fire, many were charged, few were convicted. The only person to ever serve time for the Iroquois Theater Fire was a man whom police caught robbing the dead. Winnetka was coming of age. The days of the rugged pioneer building a cabin in the woods was a faint memory. Its citizens were pious, teetotaling intellectuals, wealthy professionals, many of whom commuted to work in Chicago. But not everyone fit the profile. In the 1880s, there was a tinsmith who lived and worked on Linden between Elm and Oak, where the village hall is today. His name was Hager. He gained a reputation as the Winnetka hermit, a misanthrope who hated the world and everyone in it. His wife's screams were often heard throughout the village when he beat her. Children teased him behind his back, but if ever confronted by him, ran away in terror. One spring morning, Hager was spotted driving his horse and wagon out of the shop, hauling a large tin box. He headed down Elm Street toward the lake. When he arrived at the beach, he dumped the heavy container onto the sand, pushing it toward the waves. Before he could get it into the water, his wife suddenly burst through the lid. Hager had welded her inside, intending to drown her in the lake. She got away from him, and, hysterical, ran back up Elm, screaming and crying all the way. When she returned to town, Robert Moth and 2 other men came out of their shop to see what the matter was. When Hager returned, the 2 men grabbed him and exacted their own brand of justice. They horsewhipped him. The old man was bedridden for a week, unable to move. Not the rule of law exactly, but Hager never did try to kill his wife again. In the late 19th century, a New England educator named Francis Parker rebelled against America's regimented authoritarian method of teaching. He was convinced that strict conformity and rote memorization did not engage a child's unique abilities and interests. Parker started 2 new schools in Chicago, launching what became known as progressive education. 2 of his students, Carlton Washburn and Perry Dunlap Smith, became key Winnetka educators. In time, Winnetka's schools were held up as the best example of how to implement the progressive method, and teachers from around the world traveled here to observe firsthand Winnetka's schools. Washburn became school superintendent in 1919. He established the individualized learning system, which recognized that just because 2 children are the same age, they don't progress at the same rate.
The individualized learning system allows each student to do each grade's work at his or her own natural rate of progress, unhurried by those who are quicker and unhampered by those who are slower. Carlton Washburn.
At first, residents were wary of this new teaching method and plied Washburn with so many questions that the Winnetka Talk printed a column called School Problems, so Washburn could answer parents' concerns. Washburn also established a research department to assess the effectiveness of curricula and teaching methods. It was the result of this research that led to the publication of over 100 articles on progressive education. The system became known worldwide as the Winnetka Plan. The same year Washburn became superintendent, Perry Dunlap Smith founded North Shore Country Day School. Smith was less interested in educational research than in developing the whole child and instilling a strong sense of community, reflecting the principles of democracy. He initiated the morning exercise, a time every day for sharing projects, programs, or conversation across grades and ages. Smith believed that everyone, including the very young, must have practice in exercising choice. Student governors held town meetings with the student body to share information and to make school policy. Today, student government is common practice, but in the 1920s, it was unheard of. Also unique to North Shore Country Day was the substantial amount of time and resources dedicated to the arts and to athletics. Smith, a former lineman on the Harvard football team, believed girls' athletics were just as important as boys. North Shore Country Day was denied membership to the Illinois High School Association because it supported girls' teams in competition. It wasn't until the 1970s that state athletic leagues for women were finally established. Though Smith and Washburn were technically vying for the same students, and each utilized different aspects of the progressive method, the men became good friends. Together they founded the Winnetka Teachers College in 1932. Both were leaders in the Progressive Education Association. But their most famous collaboration was hatched at a dinner party while in conversation with another Winnetka resident, Sebastian Hinton. Hinton had grown up in Japan. His father, a mathematician, wanted to teach him about spatial dimensions. He built a bamboo framework in the garden that modeled a three-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. While the mathematics were lost on young Hinton, he and his friends loved to climb around the cube and hang by their knees from the poles. Upon hearing this story, Washburn got excited about creating something similar as a piece of playground equipment. After dinner, Washburn, Smith, and Hinton went to Hinton's house and worked late into the night designing the structure. They built a prototype, a crude frame of iron pipes, at North Shore Country Day, where it became very popular with the students. Hinton took out a patent on the structure, calling it a jungle gym. The creation of the Skokie Lagoons opened up much more buildable land in the west and southwest parts of Winnetka. The Horace Mann School was falling into disrepair, and as downtown Winnetka pushed westward, its location was less attractive. The Skokie School opened in 1922. Its design incorporated several new innovations, such as skylights, wider hallways, larger common areas, all unusual in 19th century schools. Then in 1937, the school district purchased a large plot of land near Crow Island Woods with the intent of building a new school there.
This is to be our dream school. For years we've been thinking about it. We want it to be the most functional and most beautiful school in the world. We want it to crystallize in architecture the best educational practices we can evolve. Carlton Washburn.
Washburn wanted it suited to the ideals of progressive education. He wanted something like the Cranbrook Center in Michigan, which had been designed by Finnish architect Elio Saarinen. The Depression left so many architects out of work that Washburn was inundated with men applying for the job. Among them was an unlikely candidate named Larry Perkins. Although he was the son of famed architect Dwight Perkins, he was young, inexperienced, and had a thin resume. Washburn was kind enough to meet with Perkins, though he had many more qualified architects lined up. When he mentioned that he wished he could find someone like Saarinen, Perkins saw his chance. Perkins had met Saarinen when the famed architect first came to the United States from Finland. Saarinen agreed to split the work and the commission with Perkins and his partners, Wheeler and Will. Washburn was sold. Perkins spent the spring and fall of 1938 literally going to school at Horace Mann, Greeley, and Hubbard Woods schools. He sat in the classrooms, talked to children, teachers, and administrators, janitors, and parents. The result was an L-shaped design incorporating a large classroom space with movable furniture, a workroom with running water for art projects, a bathroom, and window walls that let the outside in. Ceilings were lowered from the standard school ceiling height of 12 feet to 9 feet to create a more intimate and homey atmosphere. Everything in the room, counters, doorknobs, and blackboards, were sized to children, not adults. Even the auditorium's 400 plywood seats are graduated in size, with small ones in the front and larger ones near the rear. A collection of L-shaped classrooms became Crow Island School. Other innovations included recessed lockers in the hallways, front steps with a heating coil underneath to melt winter snow, and a pioneer room in the basement constructed for the third grade curriculum. The furniture was designed by L.A.L. Saarinen's son, Eero. Eero Saarinen's wife, Lily Swan, created whimsical ceramic tiles that were woven into the brick walls in various places. The architect's choice of brick for the interior and exterior walls was controversial at the time. It was common brick, the kind of brick generally used at the time on the back of the building that faced the alley. But the most unusual feature was the off-center clock at the top of the tall chimney. It's said that Saarinen thought the clock was like a pocket watch, placed in the side pocket, not in the center. The school opened in the fall of 1940 as the Depression continued and the war in Europe spread. From the beginning, Crow Island School was a model for educators around the globe, and when the war ended, a plethora of new schools were built in the United States, many of them imitations of Crow Island.